Hello everyone and welcome back to Wordfence Live. Today we're looking at intentionally vulnerable WordPress sites known as honeypots. They're full of very obvious vulnerabilities and security researchers are hoping they get hacked. Today we're daring the attackers, hack this. Stay tuned, we'll be right back to get started. Thank you all for joining us on this edition of Wordfence Live. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. Today, Wordfence threat analysts Chloe Chamberlain and Ram Gall are daring the hackers to hack this. They've got some traps set up for hackers so that they can collect threat intelligence, and they're going to give us a tour of some of these intentionally vulnerable sites. So we're going to learn more about what Chloe and Ram and the rest of the Wordfence threat intel team here does with these honeypots. And in doing so, we're also going to learn how these sites are vulnerable, and hopefully you're not making any of these same mistakes unintentionally, but if you are, we're going to walk you through these and give you a better understanding of what's going on and help you fix these. So remember to hit the like button below the video here, as well as the subscribe and bell buttons, and you will be notified when we go live, which is every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. We haven't missed a Tuesday for a while here on live, and we just came up on our 1-year anniversary. So if you missed last week's stream, head back to the YouTube channel and check that out. Let's get started by bringing in our threat analysts, Chloe Chamberlain and Ram Gall. Chloe, what is going on over there today?
Hi, it's looking good outside. The temperature's warming up here and the flowers are starting to bloom, so I'm really excited and looking forward to a spring here.
Good, good. Yeah, my house is super cold today. I'm not enjoying it too much. Ram, what's up over there?
It's warm. It's Arizona. It's warm.
All right, so let's dive right in. You're going to see a swag form link in the chat now. The swag question is, what is an intentionally vulnerable system designed to attract malicious activity called? Click the link, submit your answer there. I believe that is multiple choice. So, yep, there'll be the first 5 correct submissions there to the swag question, which again is, what is an intentionally vulnerable system designed to attract malicious activity called? Okay, so we got a lot to show today. We got some screen sharing, so you're going to be able to follow along with Chloe and Ram here and check on your site, make sure you're not making any of these mistakes. So while you're doing the swag form there, let's get into it on our side here. Ram, do you want to start off and let people know what a honeypot is exactly?
Well, it looks like the secret's out. Anyways,
I think so.
so a honeypot is basically a target, and this has nothing to do with a honey badger, by the way. It's basically a target that's been intentionally set up to be vulnerable and is used to entice attackers to compromise the victim target. This can be anywhere, anything from like servers to a site. There's a bunch of reasons you might want to do this. You might want to gain visibility into what types of attacks are being used against the ecosystem at large. You might want to intentionally get a site infected to see what kind of malware different attackers are injecting into sites and what they're doing with it. You do want it to be something of a controlled environment that you can shut down at any time. But yeah, basically a honeypot is something that's set up to be intentionally vulnerable so that hopefully attackers will compromise it and you can gain information about how they did that and what their next steps are. I will say that we don't use honeypots to the same extent because of the amount of visibility we get. We don't have as much need for honeypots as we might have in the past because we can look at what attackers are doing on actual sites. But they still sometimes come in handy to gain some visibility, and we're kind of going to show you how you would set up a honeypot and how attackers would take advantage of it if they were interested in doing so today.
So you just went over honeypot. What about a honeynet?
So a honeynet is basically an entire network of honeypots. It's an entire network of vulnerable systems, or at least, a network with one vulnerable entry point and additional ways to pivot that are fairly obvious, so that attackers can take over the entire network and you can kind of get some visibility into how they move. Does that sound about right, Chloe?
Yeah, that sounds spot on.
Jody loves your hair, Chloe, and she is in sunny Florida, and I am jealous of that. So
Thank you.
that sounds nice. Hello, Mark, and thanks for joining us. Jeff, Tom, Yos, as usual, we appreciate you stopping by. So, we're going over some intentionally vulnerable sites or honeypots today, and we just got the lowdown on what a honeypot is from Ram. Chloe, do you want to talk about some weak passwords?
Yeah, so before we dive in, just to mention this, so basically everything we're doing today is showing you how to make a vulnerable site. So as a normal WordPress user, just make sure you're doing the exact opposite of what we're telling you to do if you want to create a honeypot. So it'll keep your site protected, but you can also learn a little bit about, how attackers are doing this and why you should not do these certain things. So just keep that in mind as we're going. But the first thing I want to cover is for your honeypot, your WordPress site, you'd probably want to set up, weak credentials. So that would be using the default username, which is admin, and then some sort of insecure password. So you could do anything from like password, root, QWERTY, ABCD 123, any sort of combination. You can make it like a little bit more difficult if you want to gain a little bit of more information about how they're getting a hold of that password. But yeah, so you would want to set a default username and then a insecure password if you want to get them in there. So I have a bunch of vulnerable sites in one hosting account. I didn't intentionally set them up as honeypots. They've just kind of ended up becoming them because, I just leave vulnerable plugins laying around and all sorts of stuff because on live, I'm showing how to do certain things and stuff. And I just end up leaving it because, if it gets hacked, I want to see that and I want to see what they're doing. So pretty much all of my websites have, the default admin and some insecure password there. And I actually did get hacked once. I don't think Wordfence was installed, and that's why. And I went to go look at the hack, and I looked at it in the morning. It was a morning of live one day, and so I looked at it, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to come back later and take a look at it. And then, after live, I came back to take a look at it, and my hosting provider had already cleaned it all up. So I was really upset about that. But that's a good thing, I guess, for my hosting provider because they were able to clean it up pretty quickly. But yeah, that was because I was using a weak password. I went into my logs and everything, and I looked and I saw, the start of a brute force, and then I saw that they guessed it. And so that was really cool to see. At least I got the logs out of that. But yeah, so you'd want to set that up, to kind of get some insight on how hackers are, brute forcing or using dictionary attacks and whatnot to get into the account. So one pause. So a brute force attack is essentially just, punching in a bunch of like random characters, letters, numbers. There could be some pattern to it to try and guess a password, but it's literally just brute forcing their way in. And then there's a dictionary attack, which is what's going to be more common in WordPress. And so that's using like a list of known vulnerable passwords and stuff. So that's going to be like password, root, all those sorts of things, like in a huge text file. And those will just be like, they keep like firing them at the WordPress site to try and guess which password it is. And then there's a hybrid, which is kind of a combination of the two. So, you can use dictionary words and then add on, characters or numbers and see if you can guess it that way. So those are, the most common you'll see in WordPress. So just wanted to go over those a little bit. Do you think that all sounds? Yeah.
I was going to say some newer users who are just getting a little more security focused and security minded, they might not understand how quickly those brute force attacks can guess a bad password, right?
Oh yeah. So I'll actually show you real quick. Let me go ahead and share my screen, just how easy this is once you have a insecure password. So sharing my screen. Ooh. And so today I'm going to be using a handy dandy tool called WP-Scan, something WordPress penetration testers use to, enumerate sites and kind of find these types of things. And so what I'll do is I'll open up my terminal. And the first thing I want to do as an attacker, so right now I'm pretending to be the attacker. So this is how they would try and get your password essentially. So WP Scan has a nice brute force tool. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. And the first thing I want to do is enumerate users. Since I'm using the default admin, it's most likely that an attacker would just use admin in the first place and try with that. But they may want to enumerate to make sure that I have the admin username. So I would copy this and I'll paste it over here because you should be able to get a better view at this. And I accidentally pasted it weird because I go from Mac to Linux and it gets all weird. But let me go ahead and fix this. So what we have is WP Scan, which is the tool. And can you guys see this okay?
Yeah, it's actually pretty high resolution.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure it was nice and visible. And then you have the URL. So we have our target URL. And then we have enumerate. So what we want to enumerate and what we want to find out. And then I have a U at the end, which stands for username. So I'll go ahead and enter that. And then what this is doing is it's just running a bunch of things prior to, because they have a bunch of other features in there that isn't just the enumerating users and such. So that's going in there. And that's going to take, just a second to run. And see, we have like uploads directory has listing enabled, all this stuff. And down here at the bottom, we have enumerating users via passive and aggressive methods. And that was pretty quick. It found out that I have the admin user on my account. They found it through a WP JSON endpoint, and then also the sitemap for users. So don't use admin, and then try and configure your site so that username enumeration isn't possible, because I think that it's a security issue. Some people might argue that it's not, but I don't think that your username should be public. So just throwing that out there. And then admin is, it just makes things easier, so you shouldn't use it. And then have I missed anything so far, Ram, that you think we should cover before we get into the password part?
Not really. I mean, this is more or less what a targeted attack would look like. I do think that, this is going to be, if someone like you isn't attacking a site, they have a much higher chance of getting in than most of the brute force traffic we see. So most brute force attacks are not this targeted, but this is what a targeted attack would look like.
Yeah, usually you'll just have bots going around shooting at every site and have the scripts going and stuff. And so maybe, you set up a honeypot so you can try and figure out, what their script is kind of doing and stuff. So that's one of the cool things about honeypots. Wouldn't you say, Ram?
Yeah. And I mean, that is, getting visibility is actually super useful.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clear my screen with the clear command. And so the next thing I do as an attacker, now that I have, I know what the username is, or, I just used admin, you can use this command. I'll go ahead and copy it. I'll go ahead and paste it over here. So what we have again is WP Scan, which is the tool, URL, which is my target URL, passwords. I put in a password list because we're going to be using a dictionary attack for this. So I just have a list of predefined words and passwords, and this is a really common dump of passwords. And then username admin, because we know that that's what that is. But if you were just using default and an attacker wanted to skip the user enumeration step, they could just do this. But again, they're likely using scripts and stuff, so it's not going to be this targeted in most cases. And then I'll go ahead and enter. And so it's going to do that whole thing again. Take a couple seconds and enumerating all plugins, no plugins found. That's just passive. And then enumerating config backups. You're probably going to see something there. Just take a moment for that.
I do want to mention that this is kind of a little bit of an aside, but we have gotten a few, people that are curious if there's an increase in the number of brute force attacks going around, and the answer is yes. We have seen about 50 to 70% more brute force attacks starting, I want to say, 2 or 3 weeks ago compared to the previous period. So it's not your imagination. There are more brute force attacks happening to the entire WordPress ecosystem as far as we can tell. And again, most attackers aren't actually trying very hard. They're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. So as long as you have a decent brute force protection system in place, Wordfence, you should be okay. But it is a thing. It's not your imagination.
Now, Ram, speaking of WordFence, we have some discussion just about how easily usernames are to find and about hiding usernames. There is a default option in WordFence to prevent the discovery of usernames through the author scans and the OEmbed API, right? So that will help to a degree with this.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to take a sort of more moderate position that, you know, it's not the end of the world if an attacker knows your username. The primary risk for an attacker knowing your username is that it's a lot easier for them to find passwords that have been used with that username elsewhere. So, you know, if your username is known, it makes it a lot easier for an attacker to reuse credentials that might have been in a breach. So it massively increases your risk if you're the kind of person that reuses passwords, like I was until about 2 years ago.
Yeah, and just so you see over here on the scan, you could see that that was really quick once it got to the password attack part, and the password was the username was admin and the password was password. So super duper secure, right? But so that's what I would set up, you know, for a honeypot. So, you know, an attacker could easily guess that and try and get in, and then I could see what they were doing in the back end and whatnot. So I think that's pretty cool. Did we miss anything in the passwords and in default credentials and such?
No, not at all. I mean, like, yeah, if you use admin as your username, then chances are you also probably have a pretty easy to guess password. So, yeah.
So we have been seeing an increase in brute force attempts as well, and I see we have a question from John. Is anyone else swamped with attacks from Amazon AWS instances?
And I mean, it's not EC2 in particular. It's just that AWS is a really fast and easy way to spin up a bunch of instances and achieve scale very quickly. I think that, you know, for the most part, most attackers are still using hacked sites and botnets of, you know, hosting accounts that they've compromised. That is definitely cheaper for them. But it, you know, it's pretty trivial for, you know, an attacker with resources and a list of credentials they think are actually useful and are likely to have a higher chance of success to, you know, buy some EC2 instances or, you know, rent some whatever other cloud providers. You know, there's a bunch of different cloud providers that this happens to. It's just that AWS is the biggest one. So, yeah, you're going to see a lot of EC2 instances sending attacks. I mean, they do shut them down if there's enough traffic, but, you know, an attacker can get out, you know, a couple million, maybe more than that attacks before it's enough to really get them shut down.
So for anybody joining us, we're talking about intentionally vulnerable sites and traps, honeypots that are set up. So the first thing we went over here, weak passwords and default user admin accounts. So if you're setting up a honeypot, that's something to consider. If you're just securing your site, that's something that you're going to want to check on and make sure that you're not doing. Chloe, what are we going to take a look at next here?
So one more thing to add to the password thing. So just as a normal WordPress user, make sure you're using not the default admin username and secure passwords. But the next thing we wanted to talk about was wp-config.php.bak being left around and why you shouldn't do this and why you should do it if you're doing a honeypot. Ram, do you want to take this one? I know you have a backup set up.
I do. So, you know, we've probably mentioned this in a couple of other live streams, but it's fairly common for people to back up their config file before making changes by adding a .bak to it, and this is not necessarily a great idea. And I'll show you why. So,
unless you're setting up a honeypot, right?
So I just happened to I just happened to set up a vulnerable site, and wait, you know what? I realized that this isn't actually working. I mean, it's working, but it's not actually going to show you my screen. So because it's not set to render the backup file, it's just set to download it, and it won't actually show when I download it.
Do you want me to do it real quick?
Sure. If you've got it set to actually display the backup file in the browser instead of, you know, just downloading it.
Oh, I don't. You don't know how we could do that real quick? Or should we just do the download?
let's just do the download anyways. The main point is that it's fairly trivial. Attackers are fairly used to spraying out requests to millions of sites at once, checking them for vulnerabilities. It's kind of trivial for them to check for common backup and PHP and backup paths and like info paths. So that's one way attackers can do it. They can also do it by Google dorking, which is basically just crafted Google searches that show you vulnerable websites, which we are also not going to show you on the screen today because we might show you actual vulnerable websites.
So the issue here is if somebody gets a hold of this backup file, they may have some of your credentials, PHP myadmin, and they're logging in, and you're just in trouble at that point, right?
Yeah, if someone gets a hold of your WordPress config backup file, there's two things that could possibly go wrong. One of them is more immediate. One of them takes a little bit more of a crafty attacker. I guess you could show a config file, but anyways, there we go. Yeah, you've got it working.
So once you access this, it'll ask me to download it, and so I'll just go ahead, and I'm not going to download it. I'll just open it with my code editor. And so what you can see here is the wp-config file. And what we were just talking about is that you get all this database information. You get, the username, or the database name, the username, the password, the host, which is usually localhost there. And then you get the authentication, unique salts and keys. So these can be used to, generate certain things. They could be used in assistance to, find matching password hashes and such. And you just don't want an attacker to get a hold of these because, if we have a honeypot, we do want our attacker to get a hold of these because we want to see what they do with it. But as a WordPress user, you do not want your attacker or an attacker to get a hold of these because it's really bad, and they get a lot of sensitive information and can do some bad things there.
Yeah, like Chloe, you just found fairly recently a vulnerability in the Facebook Pixel for WordPress plugin where those salts and keys that most people won't actually change, even if they change their database password, where those could be used to basically take over a site. So
yeah, as an unauthenticated user. So if you had this backup lying around and an attacker could download it and you had that Facebook plugin installed, then they could get remote code execution and do all sorts of bad things. So I should probably
we've got
set
a question from Aisha about lots of frequent failed login attempts, and the truth is you can't stop them from trying. That's not, people are going to try to hack your sites no matter what. People are never going to stop trying to hack WordPress sites. But it doesn't matter if they're trying as long as you can pretty much universally stop them from succeeding. And that's one of the things that we are pretty good about doing. We do add people that try too many times to our block list, though. So if you're a premium user, then they won't even be able to try, at least to send a login request if they end up on the block list. That doesn't mean they won't try. They'll just get stopped right away.
You can disable XML RPC if you're not using, Jetpack or the WordPress plugin, right, Ram?
Yeah.
Which cut down probably a lot of attempts.
Yeah, you can remove XML RPC, the file, which will cut down on a reasonable number of brute force login attempts, though not all of them. And I mean, there's a number of things you can do to reduce the chances of success, but I feel reasonably confident. I feel very confident at this point saying that even the free version of Wordfence offers pretty much ideal brute force protection unless they already know your password. At which case, I hope you have two-factor authentication, which we also include. So,
also free. Now, we had a question from Rob, which is a good question. Why isn't a default random admin username generated in WordPress? And my initial thought would be, that could cause some issues. There's a lot of people who are not using a password manager where they would store that username in a safe place, and there would be a lot of lockouts potentially. But Ram, is there any other reason you can think of? Because it's always good to generate a complex username if possible.
I do think that, despite the fact that you don't want your username to be easily found, you should start with the assumption that attackers already know it, because that will make you take your password more seriously and other steps down the chain more seriously. You don't want to pin all your hopes on having a secure username is all I'm saying. With that said, if you've got a password manager, then, it's not a terrible idea to, generate a interesting username. But I will say that most systems have character limits on what you can do with a username. Like, there can only be certain characters in usernames, and also in most cases you can use either an email address or a username in WordPress. So if someone knows your email address, they could still probably use it to log in.
So if you're just joining us, we went over weak passwords and using a default user admin account. We just covered backups and unsafe backups sitting around your site, but specifically the wp-config file. Chloe, do you want to talk a little bit about directory listing and what some issues that can come from that, having that enabled?
Yeah, for sure. So directory listing is basically making it possible for directories to be listed from the browser. So I'll go ahead and share my screen for this to just walk through it as I show it. So 1 second here. And so what this basically means is I can go to WP content, I can go to uploads and hit enter, and I can see all the files in here. And basically you could have things in there that you wouldn't want someone on the outside to see, and such. So if I'm creating a honeypot, I would like this to be visible, and I would like to plant a couple of things in there, so that I can see if an attacker is looking for these things, and looking through my directories and seeing what they do, if I have directory listing enabled. So as I'm setting up a honeypot, I want to make sure that this is enabled. And as a WordPress user, you should be making sure that you have this disabled so attackers can't be doing this. I think that's about all for directory listing. It's kind of a simple topic. Ram, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that, a lot of the time, the only security available for on-site backups is via obscurity. Like, there's a pretty limited set of directory names that backup plugins will use, and most of them go in, like, you can look up where plugins store their backups, and most backup plugins get around this by just naming the backups like random names or hashes. But that's not going to help you if you have directory listing enabled. So like turning off directory listing is probably the biggest thing, because it makes it so much easier to find any of the, it lets attackers, take a direct look at what you have installed. It lets them know if there's any backups. It lets them browse through what you've got on your site. So that's kind of the big thing. I guess the other thing is, it's another reason to keep offsite backups, because, you don't want to keep all your backups on site anyways, because if your site gets removed or deleted, then your backups will as well. So there's no point to having backups on your hosting account. You should send them somewhere else and then get rid of them from your hosting account.
Now, Ram, you talked about the wp-config backups lying around your site. Can you expand and talk about unprotected backups in general and where the security issues are there?
Sure. So wp-config backups, they give people the option to get into your database because your database credentials might be in there. But they don't actually need to get into your database if they can just download a backup copy of your database, which might have stuff like your username and password hashes in them that, they can then crack pretty easily, because, if they're downloading a backup, they probably have a backup of your config file as well, which has the keys and salts in it, which will definitely expedite brute forcing those hashes. I mean, it's hard to brute force a password hash just from scratch if it's been salted. But if you have the salts, then that makes it a lot less tricky.
Now, jumping back just a minute here, Dave asked, turning off directory listing is done within your htaccess files on Apache. Ram, do you know off the top of your head?
Correct. Yes, it's options minus indexes. I'll get someone to.
And while
Sorry.
Ram was talking, I was just kind of I was just kind of going in the background and showing you that the directory listing was enabled, and then there was a backup folder, and then in that backup folder there was a backup, and I just downloaded it, and I'm opening it right now, and I don't know if you can see it very well, but
Sorry.
Yeah.
For Bonnie
Oh,
Site
no,
Solutions, you don't have to crack the database password to get to a download of the database backup because you can just download the database backup and open it up. There's no password involved.
And in this is unzip, you have everything, so all the files and everything. Of course, the WordPress default files aren't really important because those are default, but you have the wp-config in there, like Ram was saying. And so yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Don't have your backups laying around and directory listing enabled. Well, I guess we're talking about honeypot. So if you have a honeypot, yes, do this. But if you're a WordPress user, don't do it.
So what we're telling you is to not do these things unless you want a honeypot, in which case you should do these things.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Chloe, do you want to expand any more on unprotected backups, or do you want to jump over to our next thing, which is vulnerable plugins, something that you're very familiar with?
Yeah, both Ram and I are. I think
Yes.
backups are good. So the next thing we would need to set up in our honeypot would be a bunch of vulnerable plugins. And so if you're interested in certain exploits for any specific plugin, for example, let's say one just dropped yesterday and you're curious to see if any attackers are using it, and you don't have the kind of insight that, Wordfence does, perhaps set up, a honeypot or two with that vulnerable plugin and see if you get any hits or, see what they do once they get in, all those sorts of things. So as a security researcher, I would potentially want to, set up a site, put it in there and see if they're attacking it, what IPs are attacking it, and those sorts of things. So setting up vulnerable plugins would be cool. If you aren't doing a honeypot, make sure that you aren't leaving vulnerable plugins laying around because that would be very bad and attackers can get in through those. It's probably one of the most common ways that attackers will be getting in, password attacks, and then, vulnerable plugins are probably the top up there. So definitely don't do that if you are a WordPress user, but do it if you are trying to create a honeypot. Is there anything you want to add to the vulnerable plugins there, Ram?
Just that that you can look through WP. There's a number of resources you can look through to find what plugins have been vulnerable and what versions there are. So if you are interested in setting this up yourself, there's a bunch of places you can check to install a vulnerable version of a plugin. And usually the WordPress repository will let you download older versions of plugins in the advanced tools settings. They have a little drop down at the bottom. Now, not all plugins actually deploy in a way that lets you do this, but most of them do. We find
we
it
all
extremely
had that
convenient.
question as well, Ram, about finding which plugins are vulnerable, and I was going to expand on that and say you can sign up for the Wordfence mailing list, and Chloe and Ram will tell you which plugins are vulnerable, and then you can go ahead and, if you are setting up a honeypot, install something like that on the site. You're also going to want to disable Wordfence protection as well at that point,
On your
especially if you have
honeypot.
premium. On the honeypot, yes. Keep
Though
in
I will
mind.
say that the live traffic is actually super useful because when it blocks stuff, it actually shows you what's in the requests that were blocked. And this isn't something you can do from Apache or Nginx logs. It won't show you the contents of a post request, but live traffic will show you the contents of a post request that has been blocked. So if someone's sending an attack targeting a particular plugin, you can look at what that attack looked like in live traffic and can actually see what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
So rather than completely deactivating Wordfence, you could just disable the firewall on your honeypot site and then leave the live traffic there. Sorry, Chloe, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just going to say to add to that, live traffic logging thing, for your honeypot, you want to make sure you have as much logging as possible because you're trying to figure out, what's going on, what's happening, what these attackers are doing. So just having logging in any different form, way, shape, whatever, all that is going to give you a lot of useful information. So make sure you have that enabled and set up everywhere.
Feels very odd saying to disable the firewall and install malicious plugins on the site. So keep in mind, we're talking about here if you're creating a intentionally vulnerable site or a honeypot. We have a few questions here. Emmanuel, plugins relying on the WP API, are they safe?
If you're talking about plugins in the WordPress repository, I feel like generally speaking, most of them are safe. If there's something wrong, one of us will find it, hopefully pretty quickly. I mean, we have occasionally seen supply chain attacks where, malicious actors have purchased or taken over known plugins in the WordPress plugin repository, but that doesn't happen very often. It can, it just doesn't very often. And I do want to say that, in response to Aisha's question, it's not going to hurt. Just, a cloud firewall is not a substitute for WordPress specific firewalls. They can be useful for things like DDoS mitigation. But they basically cover different things.
Ajden had asked if rate limiting can help block DDoS. It's not specifically, Ram, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not specifically set up to prevent that, but of course, if the IPs aren't switching quick enough and your settings are set up well, you might block some there.
I mean, the Wordfence plugin, yes, Wordfence plugin blocking, doing rate limiting blocking lots of requests is going to use fewer resources than if your server was serving individual responses to each of those requests. But it's, again, it's very much a question of which tool is appropriate for what. Wordfence is really good at blocking brute force password request attempts. If someone is actively trying to just take your site down by sending it a flood of traffic from thousands of IPs, you may actually be better off with a CDN or a cloud-based solution, but you'll still need to make sure that your server is configured to block any traffic that doesn't come through that, because if attackers know your origin IP, they can just aim for that directly and still take you down. So different tools, a layered approach.
Just got to stay on top of it. So we're continuing here with setting up a honeypot, some things to consider. If you're just protecting your site, then don't do these things. But Ram, you had talked about some publicly accessible files and backups. How about a phpinfo file?
Ooh, so I do actually, I think Chloe probably has this set up. So let me do some screen sharing.
I saw a mention of Cloudflare, so that's great to use with Wordfence as far as preventing those sorts of attacks, and just take the layered approach, like Ram said.
Yeah, so I think most of you are probably familiar with this. This is a phpinfo file, but I guess you can't actually see the URL bar in there. Anyways, most of the time when people make these, they name the file info.php or phpinfo.php, which has an interesting side effect. You can just basically send out requests to millions of sites just asking if there's an info.php or phpinfo.php file, and if it returns a 200, that means they've got one installed. And once you have that, you can find out all sorts of cool stuff about a site, like the PHP version. You can find out where on the site the document root is, which should tell you something about how to, traverse directories. If you, for instance, know of a local file inclusion exploit, you can give it an absolute path to, include a separate file. You can find out stuff like, this runs Apache, and that means that, you can, if you're... So something about attackers is that one of the big things is you want to try to save time. And that means, attackers are perfectly fine throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what sticks. But if you can rule out half of those attacks because you know that, they're not going to work on this particular configuration, that means you can attack and take over a site twice as fast because you only have to try half as many things.
So, Chloe, the next thing we're going to talk about here, old versions of WordPress and plugins on a dev site. You and Ram have both cleaned sites in the past. I'm sure this is something that you've seen sitting around on customer sites, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so one thing you want to do for your honeypot is you might want to set up what looks like a old test or dev site with some vulnerable plugins and maybe a vulnerable version of WordPress, go way back. And set that up and have it, in the same hosting account. And see if attackers are, finding these dev sites and test sites, see if they're maybe specifically targeting them, and see what they do once they get access to them. Are they using it to get into your main site and affect that, or are they just kind of stopping at the dev or test site? And you just kind of watch and see what happens there. And so as a WordPress user, make sure that you don't have your dev test site in the same hosting account, and make sure that you're keeping it up to date as well, and you're keeping those plugins and stuff up to date so that you don't have to worry about a hacked site or a hacked site infecting your other site or things like that. Does that sound
As a
about right?
honeypot creator, you absolutely want an old copy
Yeah.
of your site present on your honeypot. And yes, Dave, we should also have a copy of the phpinfo file present. And you can look for requests in your access logs to see if people are trying to access that phpinfo file or info.php file. And, I suspect that, even if you haven't intentionally set up a honeypot, you can still probably check your access logs. And if you go far back enough, I guarantee you'll find someone searching for info.php or phpinfo.php on your site's access logs, because it's really easy to do.
Our viewers are loving how excited you get, Ram, with some of these topics. So another topic that I'm sure will excite Ram are old default WordPress installation. What can you tell us about that, Ram?
We've kind of mentioned Google dorking before, and that's basically using crafted Google search terms to find vulnerable sites, which again we can't show you, but they are a pretty good way of telling if there's a old vulnerable WordPress site installation present. A lot of people they'll name their old sites like literally old site or WordPress.old or something, so you can do a search for sites that have that in their URL, because Google will still index the subfolders. It'll index whatever it can. So once it finds out that there's a old version of the site in the subfolder, that'll probably show up in your search results. And again, it's a lot easier to do this if directory indexing is enabled. But even if it's not, the main risk with these, or opportunity if you're running a honeypot site, is that it'll have an older version of everything: older WordPress, older plugins, and maybe older database password or older database version, or older copy of the database, I should say, not actually older version of the database.
And unfortunately, outside, even if we weren't discussing honeypots, this is just something we probably see far too often, these files and backups and folders sitting around. So, Chloe, we touched on it earlier. Again, something I'm sure you've seen in site cleaning, several sites sitting around on the same cPanel, and you have cross-infection there and a lot of issues, right?
Did we cover the the WordPress that isn't set up yet?
No, I think we should definitely cover that real quick. Yeah. So what Ram's talking about is you also, for your honeypot, you should set up a WordPress. So what you should do is you should go to the WordPress.org site. You should download a copy of WordPress. You should take it to your site, upload it, uncompress it, and just leave it there. So basically, what you have is a completely unset up copy of WordPress. And I've seen this a lot in site cleaning, and it's probably one of my favorite things, because it's just so easy to forget about, and it's just really cool and interesting. But basically, you have this unset up instance of WordPress in your hosting account that you used to, maybe when you first installed WordPress, or maybe you had your site hacked at one point, so you needed these clean files to swap them out or whatnot. So essentially what can happen here is an attacker can Google dork and find, a wp-config sample file or whatnot, and they can go to the site, and then they can see that there's an unset up instance of WordPress, and they can actually go through the setup process. They can link their own database, and they can, once they get in there, they can use the theme editor, the file editor, or upload a plugin, and then they can start executing remote commands on your server, and then they can start infecting, your site, and then your real site, because it's probably in the same account because you left it there on accident. Well, you did intentionally because this is a honeypot, but you left it there intentionally, and so they can go in and infect everything. So yeah, I highly recommend adding that to your honeypot. It's really cool to see, and it's cool to see in the logs and everything. So definitely do that. Do you think I'm missing anything there, Ram?
Not at all. I just want to do a yes and say that this is actually probably one of the most useful techniques you can do, because it lets you basically observe what an attacker does if they get to make their very own website on your server. They'll probably point it at like a remote database. So, hey, that, here's this remote database that is serving up their malicious content, and they're probably using the same database on a bunch of other sites that they've hacked as well with the same credentials. Not that you should do this ever, but basically you're inviting them to set something up on your hosting account, and then they're putting their credentials on your hosting account.
Now, is this more exclusive to targeted attacks, or are you seeing a lot of bots potentially that are looking for these setup files to?
These seem to be largely automated to a large extent. And one thing that, if you're on the other end of this where you don't want this on purpose, one thing you should do is check your config file and make sure that, your database isn't pointed to some other site out there on the web that you've never heard of, serving up, content, offering cheap Ray-Bans. Oh, that's another thing that's really cool is that you can get an idea of the kind of malware attackers are putting on their site, the kind of, spam terms that they're putting in databases, the kind of stuff that attackers are trying to monetize. It gives you a really good idea of that.
Tim makes a good point. You need to be very careful with a honeypot on a shared server.
Don't ever put a honeypot on a shared server, ever, please. Set up a standalone instance, just $5 a month on whatever platform for a mini VPS, and make that, any sites on there that are intended to get infected, make sure that you want all of them infected. I mean, you can still use it as a cool way to see how they're going to spread attacks, but yeah.
And one cool thing I want to mention about, creating honeypot and stuff is if you're getting into, maybe WordPress security, and you just kind of want to learn more about, how attackers work and whatnot, this is a great way for you to learn, observe logs, see what is happening, what these people are doing. And I think it's just a really cool way to learn. So even if you're not super interested, but you're interested, just set one up and, see what happens. I think it could be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think, oh, never mind. Yeah, I'll let Scott go.
Oh, no, I was going to say we got about 10 minutes left, so
demo.
Think up what you two want to do real quick, and I'm going to do our swag winners here.
Do we want to do the demo?
Ram is excited for the demo, so we're going to have to do the demo. So our swag winners, Gregory, Jason, Roger, Ikenna, and Joff were our 5 winners there. And our swag question, which I have forgot already, was what is an intentionally vulnerable system designed to attract malicious activity called, and what is that called, Chloe?
Honeypot.
Yes. So
not honey badger.
Or a honeynet. So yes, congrats to you 5. We will be sending some swag out. Feel free to send us some pictures after you receive that if you'd like, and we may throw them on the stream here. So Ram, give us an idea of what we're demoing here.
I think this is actually Chloe's demo. I mean, I can actually demo how to take over a site based on the default installation, but I think she's actually got something set up where it'll actually let her take over multiple sites on a cPanel, so I'll let her do it. But this is basically an exploit chain of old default installation to set up a new site and infecting other sites. I'll let her take it from here. It's very cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed for this and hope everything goes smoothly, because I tested it beforehand. But it should work, so let's go along. So what I have here is WordPress folder, and this is basically the new unset up WordPress installation. We can pretend that, I did some Google dorking and I found this. or I had a bot go out doing some searching and scraping for this. Perhaps I looked for, a setup config file or anything like that. And so you can see here that I have my super duper secure website with the WordPress, and you can see that I'm getting the installation page. So let's start with English, continue. And so welcome to WordPress. Before getting started, we need this information. So we have all this information. Let's go. And so database name, I have all this over here. Go ahead and copy this. And so there, username.
And you have that information because you found a backup config file, don't you?
Oh, no, I'm actually hooking up my own database.
External database? Oh, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. It's not actually external, but I could.
Ignore the local host.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and submit this and let's see if it works. Okay, we've made it through this part of the installation, and WordPress can communicate with my external database. And so we'll go ahead and run the installation. Let's say we'll go with the super secure username. We'll go with the super secure password. We'll confirm use. We'll go with just my email. And then I want to discourage this for now. Don't save. And let's see if this works. All right, now I can log in. And so now I have access to this site that's hosted on an external admin, that password. There.
And if you think this is an absurdly weak password, you should see the kind of passwords we routinely find in backdoors. They are terrible.
Yeah. And so, yeah, passwords, yeah. So just to summarize, what happened is we had an old WordPress installation laying around on the server in the same account and everything for my honeypot, essentially. And so as an attacker, I went and found it. I set up this site. And I have access to this site that's in the same hosting account as the site that's technically unaffected at this point. But let's go ahead and let's go to the theme editor. And I'm going to go over here and copy this web shell.
And none of the stuff you can do to harden the WordPress configuration of the top level site will protect you against this. You can try to disable plugin and theme editing on your main site, but if someone accesses and sets up a WordPress in a subfolder, they can still do this. It completely disables a lot of the protections you might have used to harden your main site.
Yeah. And so once I'm in this editor, I'm going to go to the 404 template, and I'm going to go ahead and paste in my web shell that I just copied. Go ahead and paste. And I'm going to update file. Hopefully this works. File edited successfully. Let's go ahead and access a non-existent page. And okay, so that didn't work because I am not in the WordPress directory, because I have to remember to go there. Now I have this web shell, which is nice and cool. So what I did essentially is we got access to the, a blank installation that needed set up. We got into that, and then we were able to edit a file, a PHP file, which allowed me to put a backdoor into it. And now I have the ability to execute commands. So let's go ahead and just do ls real quick. Okay, so I just listed the contents of that directory. I'm going to go ahead and say ls one directory up. And so now we can see this is the site above it. And then you can see that this WordPress one is here. And then I'm going to go ahead and list again, one more directory up. And now I can see every single site that I have hosted in this cPanel. So you have everything here. And so what I can do is I can infect every single one of these sites using this backdoor. So yeah, that's pretty cool for an attacker, because they just, hit a honeypot or,
I'm going to try to hack your DB now.
Yeah.
Pretty cool and pretty scary to see there.
Yeah. So big takeaways from this: don't leave, don't leave default installations laying around. Don't host several sites in the same cPanel. Yeah. And yeah, is there any more to that, Rim?
do all those things if you want to set up a honeypot.
Yes,
That's
yes.
all I'm saying. If you want a honeypot, you should absolutely do those things. And yeah, don't
Yeah.
do those things unless you want to like actually research stuff, in which case it's you can learn a lot from doing this kind of thing. Just getting like, there's all this talk about, dividing InfoSec into like red team versus blue team, but like, kind of you do best if you kind of have an idea of what's going on both sides. Like, we are very much defenders, except for the part where we find vulnerabilities in plugins. But like Chloe and I both are, we both set up the defenses. We write firewall rules against those vulnerabilities, and we can't know how to do that unless we know how the vulnerability works. So
now is a good time. We've stressed it multiple times. If you've watched this far, or maybe you're re-watching this down the line, you didn't get to tune in live, the things that we went over today, these are good ideas if you are setting up a purposely vulnerable site to monitor what these attackers and hackers are doing. Otherwise, you're going to want to be very careful with the things that we listed off here, and make sure you're going over our other videos, which help you with the best security practices. So I have a few things to talk about before we head out, but Ram, Chloe, anything else from our list that you want to bring up?
I definitely need beard flowers for next week.
I saw that, yeah. We have some requests for some beard decorations for Ram, so we'll put that in the show notes.
I wonder if I can expense
so
those.
I
Yes.
think we could probably get
Yes,
away
you
with
can.
that. Yeah.
Nice.
So not long ago, we announced a new program that we had launched to help K through 12 public schools in the United States. And what we were doing there is offering free site security audits and site cleaning services to these K through 12 schools in the U.S. From our site cleaning team. And we worked with a number of school districts there. And after the immense amount of support and interest that we had from all over the world, we opened this opportunity up to K through 12 schools in other areas, and we found a way, to help out more schools. So we announced maybe a month or so ago that we have expanded this site audit and cleaning services to K through 12 government funded and state schools in any area, including the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and elsewhere. So if you know of a school that could use our help with a site cleaning or a site audit, you can send them our blog post that relates to that, and we will do our best to get a link to you in the chat here with that information. Also, we are hiring, so if you check out defiant.com/employment, you will see our benefits there. We have a number of roles open right now: PHP developers, SecOps. I believe we just opened a role for a QA engineer. We still have a website performance researcher and an instructional designer open, so multiple positions there, and I believe we're giving away a gift card if you send us a candidate or refer a candidate that we go forward with. So check out our blog post on that is posted. I believe, Chloe, you have a video, I think it's on the YouTube channel, about your experience here at Wordfence. So we will do our best to link that into the chat as well, and go find that if you're interested. There's a lot of information there. Now, Chloe, before we head out, you had a post last week about 10 password mistakes. If you're doing the opposite of a honeypot here and you're just trying to keep yourself secure, they should check that out, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually got a corresponding Wordfence Live video in it. So if you watched that a while back, this is basically the post that goes along with that. You can watch the post and read the, you can watch the post. You can watch the video and read the post if you want.
I will read the video.
Read the video. Ram, you also had a recent post. What plugin was that related to?
Oh, that was WP Page Builder. I have to say that, the plugin publisher's response was excellent. Once they fixed the issue, they actually released their own blog post letting their customers know to update because of a security issue. So, but this was actually kind of similar to the Elementor vulnerability I published a while back, only it was subscribers that could also, anyone who had a user account on a site, including just subscribers, could access the page builder, publish changes to your website, and that included cross-site scripting. So, yeah, read it, check
And
it
we
out,
have
and
an-
we've got an
We have
upcoming.
a new one coming soon, right? Can you
I
give
can't
any
tell you
details
much
there?
about it, but it should impact something like 3.5 million installations collectively. Though that's a sort of I don't know if that's actually the way you should count it, though, because it's across like more than a dozen plugins. But stay tuned.
Yeah, get on the mailing list. I see a lot of new names here in the chat, so if you're not currently signed up to our mailing list, you can find that in the footer of the wordfence.com page. There'll be a link to the mailing list. You'll also see a link to the podcast. You can get on that mailing list. Ram is on the podcast with our Director of Marketing, Kathy Zant, and it is awesome. You can keep an eye out for that each Friday, so stay tuned for that. But jump over to the mailing list. We really appreciate you joining us. Excellent job, Chloe, with the demos. You as well, Ram. This was a very, very fun one, and a lot of cool information here. So we appreciate everybody who stopped by and hung out with us for the hour. We will be back next Tuesday, and we hope to see you then. We hope that you have a good rest of the week here, and we will catch you next Tuesday, everybody. Bye-bye until next time.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Wordfence. We have better hackers.